When I hear the name Electronic Arts, the first thing I think of is their insanely popular sports games, the Need for Speed series, and maybe even Battlefield. But there was once a time in the early 1990s when EA was a much different company. Sure, they still had their line of insanely popular sports games, but they also gave us Road Rash, Wing Commander, and the long-running Strike series. And you know what? That made me wonder what Electronic Gaming Monthly thought of games like Desert Strike, Jungle Strike, and Nuclear Strike. Now, in case you're wondering, EGM reviewed a total of 12 Strike games between 1989 and 2009. That includes pretty much every sequel, spin-off, and handheld port. Unfortunately, what it does not include is Urban Strike, the one game in the series that EGM missed. To make up for that, I've decided to include Future Cop, LAPD, which started its life as Future Strike. And since we're doing that just for fun, we're also going to include the Mercenaries series, which was originally intended to be a reboot of the Strike franchise. What we're going to do today is count down the best and worst Strike series games using Electronic Gaming Monthly's own words and scores. There's no editorializing here, we're just going to focus on what the critics said back when these games first came out. So go and do everything you can to avoid the on-foot missions, because this is Electronic Gaming Monthly's Top 12 Strike series games.
Mr. Secretary, what's the Pentagon's response to hardliner aggression against the democratic government in Russia?
We're taking no action. Ladies and gentlemen, the President wants to make it clear that the United States military is not and will not get involved in internal Soviet matters.
We've heard reports of a covert military unit in the area. Can you confirm this?
Trust me, we are not involved.
Soviet strike.
Alright, up first at number 12, we have Desert Strike on the Lynx. I just couldn't get into this game. I found the controls awkward and hard to get used to. The graphics were unimpressive, and to top it off, your assault on the enemy is hindered because it's very difficult to see your shots. I will say that the helicopter animation is very smooth, and the sound is okay if you can handle portable sound. The many missions are nice, prolonging its play value. Otherwise, this just isn't my thing. Number 11, Jungle Strike on the Game Boy. Jungle Strike is impossible to play on the regular Game Boy, but quite fun on the Super Game Boy. The graphics are a bit too small and the sounds are rather lackluster. The action isn't all that intense, fortunately, because bullets are impossible to see. The control is good and it plays like it's 16-bit brothers, but picking up ammo is really hard. Jungle Strike is best suited for fans of the series who must have it portable. Otherwise, pass this card up. Number 10, Desert Strike, Return to the Gulf on Game Boy. A fairly faithful portable version of the 16-bit military classic. Like the other versions, the levels are huge with plenty of enemies to destroy and sub-missions to complete. Good control, too. Number 9, Desert Strike, Return to the Gulf on the Genesis. It had to happen. Just when everyone started to forget about the war in the Gulf, somebody had to go ahead and capitalize on it. It is a great shooter with realistic gameplay and controls, sparkling graphics, and crisp sounds. Had it been named Chopper Strike or something else, it would have been cool. Let's not get cocky about war. Number 8, Desert Strike, Return to the Gulf on the Game Gear. Try as they might, these gunship military games really need a big screen and large platform. Unfortunately, Desert Strike just doesn't cut it on the small screen, despite pretty good graphics. The effect just isn't there. Number 7, Future Cop, LAPD on the PlayStation. I'll give Future Cop one thing. You'll get blown away if you go into a level guns a-blazing with no plan of attack. This game is not some mindless shoot-'em-up. The gameplay is along the same lines as one of those strike games, except for a police theme instead of a military one. It works pretty well, but I'm not sure why EA didn't just call the game Cop Strike or something like that. Overall, the game's not incredible, but it's worth checking out, especially if you're a fan of the Strike games. I'd have to recommend renting it first to see if you liked it or not. Oh, one last thing. What's with the lame name? Number 6, Desert Strike: Return to the Gulf on the Super Nintendo. Electronic Arts did a very good job of creating a realistic copter game. With true-to-life missions that take us back to the war in the Gulf, this simulation is one of the best ever done in a cartridge game. While the weaknesses of the system show through, once the play control is learned, the game is manageable. Number 5, Mercenaries 2: World of Flames on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. I pretty much view Mercs 2 the same way I view fine 1980s cinema such as Predator or Commando. It's technically flawed, but the carnage makes up for said flaws. A giant fuel air bomb vaporizing bad dudes makes up for additional gripes such as the somewhat terrible dialogue and story and the menu-heavy interface. Heck, even though the co-op has the you have to be within a certain distance of each other caveat, it's still satisfying to jointly blow stuff up with your buddy, or even crash some stranger's game and grieve him by killing the people he's working for. Number 4, Jungle Strike on the Genesis. Now this is how a sequel should be. Jungle Strike has everything that Desert Strike had and more. More targets, more vehicles, and more missions. Speaking of missions, they're huge. The best part is that you're not limited by just a helicopter. The hovercraft, motorcycle, and stealth fighters are perfect additions. Number 3, Soviet Strike on the PlayStation. I always get a little nervous when companies develop next-generation updates to classic titles, but EA is right on target with Soviet Strike. The game plays exactly the same as the 16-bit games, which is definitely a good thing, since those old games had superb control, plenty of missions, and were just plain fun. Soviet Strike, of course, boasts superior graphics, the sharpest looking texture map terrain seen on the PlayStation, in fact. Sometimes the graphics are a little choppy though, like when the screen fills up with targets, but you get used to it. The game is loaded with fantastic cinemas too, and the music kicks butt. Number 2, Nuclear Strike on the PlayStation. The 32-bit Strike series is following the same evolution in gameplay as its 16-bit originators. Namely, Nuclear Strike looks and plays just like Soviet Strike, except now it packs a huge assortment of vehicles. Aside from the standard Apache, you can command a Harrier, a news chopper, even a tank. Like Soviet Strike, this sucker ain't easy. Some missions are downright frustrating. You'll do fine if you take it slow and plan your attack. And finally, in number 1, Mercenaries: Playground of Destruction on PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Although not necessarily its core mechanic, few things are more satisfying in Mercenaries than blowing crap up, and the enormous variety of methods in which you can do that makes it an absolute joy to play. The game delivers a spectacular sense of destructive freedom, while also putting enough structure in place for you to not lose sight of your objectives. Obsessively needy gamers will no doubt spend the 40 hours or so that it takes to nail all 52 bad guys, ensuring a universally good rep. While those of you who are perhaps a little more obtuse will get a perverse pleasure from needlessly provoking the ire of a particular faction. Yeah, these mercenaries are worth hiring.
Plans for nuclear weapons are on the internet. Parts can be easily purchased on the black market. Stolen radioactive materials are currently under investigation. Terrorists can make the bomb. The question is, can we stop them? Nuclear strike.
Hey, Thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes of EGM Ranks almost every Monday. We have a whole playlist featuring Mario, Sonic, Zelda, Final Fantasy, Tekken, Street Fighter, Batman, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Resident Evil, Castlevania, and more classic franchises and consoles. Give it a binge when you have some free time. Now, here's the question I have for you. Should Electronic Arts reboot the Strike series? They were about to with Mercenaries, but, it didn't quite happen. What would you even want out of a new Strike game? Let me see your thoughts in the comments below. In other news, we're going to be back later this week with reviews of a brand new Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew episode, regardless of whether or not they announce something. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,